The restaurant was calm in a way only late evenings could be. Soft lights reflected off clean tables, and quiet music played in the background, just loud enough to fill the empty spaces without demanding attention. Most customers had already left. A few couples remained, speaking in low voices, enjoying the last moments of their meals. To anyone watching, it felt like an ordinary night. A man sat alone near the window, slowly finishing his dinner. His clothes were simple, no expensive watch, no flashy shoes, nothing that would hint at who he really was. People who passed his table would never guess he ran companies worth billions. Tonight, he wanted to feel invisible. After weeks of non-stop meetings, pressure, and decisions that affected thousands of lives, he needed a quiet meal with no questions and no respect forced by money. Across the room, a waiter moved smoothly between tables. His steps were quick but careful, his back straight despite the long hours. He carried plates with ease, remembering small details about each customer without writing anything down. To most people, he was just another hard-working waiter trying to make it through the night. But behind his polite smile was a tired man carrying responsibilities much heavier than the trays in his hands. He was a single father. Every shift mattered. Every tip helped pay rent, buy school supplies, and keep food on the table. His daughter was the reason he never complained. Even when his feet hurt or his back felt stiff, he had learned to stay patient, to stay calm, and to focus on what truly mattered. Work was work. Life was waiting at home. As he refilled water glasses and cleared plates, his eyes naturally scanned the room. He didn't stare or make anyone uncomfortable, but he noticed things. Who walked in together, who avoided eye contact, who stayed longer than necessary. He didn't think much of it. It was just a habit he couldn't fully let go of. Outside the restaurant, four men stood near a dark vehicle. They weren't talking much. They pretended to look at their phones, but their attention was fixed on the window. They had been watching the man inside for nearly an hour. They knew exactly who he was, even if no one else did. They had studied his routine, his need for quiet, and his habit of traveling without security when he thought no one was watching. Back inside, the waiter approached the man by the window with the bill. He placed it down gently and asked if everything was okay. The man nodded and thanked him. Their eyes met briefly. There was nothing dramatic in that moment. Just two strangers sharing a simple exchange. Still, the waiter felt something he couldn't explain. Not danger exactly, but a shift in the air, like the calm before sudden rain. The man paid and stood up. He adjusted his jacket and took one last look around the restaurant. For a moment, he seemed almost relaxed. Free, he walked toward the exit, unaware of the eyes following his every move. The waiter watched him leave. He told himself not to overthink it. People came and went all the time. Still, his body remained tense. He wiped down a table, but didn't fully focus on the task. His ears caught sounds others ignored. The door opening, footsteps outside, the low hum of an engine starting and then stopping. The night manager called out that they would be closing soon. The waiter nodded and continued cleaning, but his attention drifted toward the window. The man who had just left hadn't driven away yet. He stood near his car, looking around, as if searching for something or someone. Outside, the four men moved closer. Their steps were slow and measured. They didn't rush. They had planned this moment carefully. They believed power came from surprise and numbers. 4 against 1. Simple. Inside, the waiter felt his chest tighten. He didn't know why, but his instincts told him something was wrong. He set the cloth down and walked closer to the door, pretending to check if it was locked properly. Through the glass, he saw shadows shifting, figures closing in around the man. His heart beat faster, but his face stayed calm. Years ago, panic might have taken control. Not anymore. He took a deep breath, steady and quiet. His mind became clear, focused only on what was happening outside. The man in the parking lot noticed too late. The space around him suddenly felt smaller. For strangers stood close enough that walking away was no longer easy. Their faces were hard, their voices low. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Inside the restaurant, no one else seemed to notice. Plates clinked. A couple laughed softly. Life continued, unaware of how quickly things were about to change. The waiter reached up and loosened his apron strings. He didn't remove it yet. He just prepared. His eyes stayed locked on the scene outside. He wasn't thinking about bravery or danger. He was thinking about responsibility, about what happens when you ignore a moment that asks you to act. For a brief second, memories tried to surface, things he had buried deep and chosen to leave behind. He pushed them away. This was now. This was real. Outside, one of the men stepped closer to the man by the car. Another blocked the path behind him. The air felt heavy, like time itself had slowed down. The waiter untied his apron and placed it neatly on the counter. He told the manager he would be right back. His voice sounded normal, almost casual. No one stopped him. He pushed the door open and stepped into the night. The cool air hit his face. The sound was sharper now. Footsteps, breathing, the quiet tension of people standing too close. He walked toward them, not fast, not slow, just steady. His presence wasn't loud, but it was firm. The four men glanced at him, surprised, annoyed. They hadn't planned for this. The man by the car looked at the waiter, confused but relieved to see another human face. The waiter stopped a few steps away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, grounded, alert, ready. In that moment, everything balanced on a thin line. One choice could turn the night into a headline. Another could quietly change the course of several lives. The waiter had not come out as a hero. He came out because he could not ignore what he saw. Because some instincts never disappear, no matter how hard you try to live a simple life. And as the four men shifted their weight and exchanged quick looks, they began to realize something was not going the way they expected. The night, which had started so quietly, was no longer ordinary at all. The night air was cool, carrying a faint smell of rain that had fallen earlier. The parking lot was dimly lit, and shadows stretched across the pavement, making it hard to see clearly. The man who had just left the restaurant felt a sudden weight on his chest. He hadn't expected company. He hadn't expected the four men standing in front of him. Their eyes were sharp, their movements deliberate, like predators surrounding their prey. He took a careful step back, his instincts telling him to stay calm and not to make sudden moves. He wasn't a fighter, at least not anymore, and he knew that panicking could make things worse. The waiter, who had stepped out just a moment ago, kept his distance but didn't retreat. His hands were relaxed at first, but every muscle in his body was ready. He could feel the tension radiating from the group. Each man had a presence that suggested they thought they were in control, that they had calculated every move, that they expected fear to follow their shadows. The waiter's eyes didn't flicker. He didn't speak. He just studied them, taking in small details. The way one kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, the other twitching his hand near his pocket, the third glancing at the rear exit, as if planning an escape. The man by the car swallowed hard. He could feel the pulse in his throat, a rhythmic reminder of the danger around him. He tried to keep his breathing steady, careful not to show fear. He remembered the waiter's calm face, and something inside him shifted slightly. There was a sense of reassurance that only someone truly attentive could give. He knew, somehow, that he was not alone in facing this. One of the men, the tallest of four, took a step forward. His voice was low and firm, almost demanding. "You know what we want," he said. The others didn't speak, their silence amplifying the weight of the words. The man by the car shook his head slightly, confused and nervous. He hadn't expected this confrontation, hadn't imagined anyone trying to hurt him like this. He opened his mouth to respond, but the waiter stepped forward, just enough to create a presence that could not be ignored. The waiter's movements were smooth and deliberate. He didn't speak, didn't shout, didn't threaten. His eyes locked on the men, and there was a stillness about him that made the attackers hesitate. It wasn't arrogance or fearlessness. It was discipline, focus, and clarity. The men had come prepared, but they had not prepared for this. Their confidence faltered just slightly, the first crack in their plan. The tallest man narrowed his eyes, sensing something off. He exchanged a glance with one of his companions, a silent communication that carried urgency and doubt. They were professionals, yes, but no one had warned them that their intended target would have company like this. The waiter's stance was controlled, measured, yet the way he moved suggested he could react to anything in a heartbeat. Each step he took was small, but it carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what he was capable of. The man by the car tried to steady his hands. He didn't want to provoke them. He wanted this to end, without anyone getting hurt. He hoped the waiter could somehow make the situation better. He didn't know the waiter, had never spoken to him outside the restaurant, but in that moment, he trusted him more than anyone else he had ever known. The four men advanced slightly, testing the space, seeing how the man by the car would respond. Their movements were careful, not careless. They were aware that even a single mistake could ruin everything. But every step forward only made the tension grow, a pressure that could be felt in the chest, tight and unyielding. The waiter continued to watch. His mind raced, not with fear but with calculations. He considered the space, the distance between the men, the possible actions each could take. Years of training that he had buried deep under a normal life now surfaced like old tools, ready for use. Not to hurt, not to seek revenge, but to protect. To ensure no one's life was ruined that night, the tallest man spoke again, more forceful this time. "Move aside." His voice carried a command, a threat. The others mirrored his intent, slowly closing in. The man by the car felt panic rising, but forced himself to take a slow breath, keeping his focus on the waiter. He didn't have skills, didn't have experience. He had only hope that someone else could steer the outcome towards safety. The waiter finally moved slightly to the side, keeping himself between the four men and the man by the car. His presence alone was enough to make them pause. He didn't act aggressively, but there was no question that he was not to be ignored. He gave them no reason to underestimate him. That small, calm gesture, the subtle shift in stance, created uncertainty in the minds of the attackers. The tallest man hesitated, scanning the waiter. His companions sensed a change in mood, the crack in confidence, and adjusted their movements, a little more cautious, a little more aware. They hadn't anticipated resistance, and certainly not this type of calm, measured resistance. It made them think, even if only briefly, about the risks they had taken, about what could happen if their plan failed. The man by the car noticed a flicker of recognition pass across the waiter's face. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it gave him hope. He realized that this was no ordinary waiter. There was a sense of skill, of hidden knowledge, of someone who had seen and handled far more than he let on. He didn't understand the details, didn't need to. He only knew that he wasn't alone, and that was enough to steady his nerves. The tension hung in the air like fog, dense and heavy. Every breath felt deliberate, every movement cautious. The four men looked at each other, uncertainty growing behind their eyes. They had thought they controlled the situation, but now control seemed to be slipping away, minute by minute. It wasn't just one person standing against them. It was a presence that shifted the balance. The waiter slowly extended a hand, not threatening, not aggressive, just a natural, human gesture. His eyes remained locked on the tallest man. In that small action, he communicated something important. He was aware, he was capable, and he was determined to prevent harm. The attackers sensed it, the subtle energy that came from confidence without arrogance, experience without boasting. It was enough to make them reconsider their next move. The man by the car felt a weight lifting slightly. He still feared for his safety, but he also felt a strange relief. He realized that the waiter's calm was contagious, that the focus in his movements inspired a sense of stability he hadn't expected. He straightened slightly, squared his shoulders, and followed the waiter's lead, showing no unnecessary panic. The attackers took a step back, almost imperceptibly, but enough to show hesitation. They had planned for a quick confrontation, expecting fear and confusion, maybe even compliance. They had not planned for observation, for patience, for discipline that could turn the tables without a single word spoken. Their confidence was shaken, even if they didn't admit it to each other. The waiter assessed the situation, weighing options silently. His goal was clear: prevent harm, protect the man, and resolve the encounter without escalating. His mind moved quickly, calculating distances, predicting movements, anticipating reactions. He considered the possible outcomes, not in terms of heroism or recognition, but in terms of safety, survival, and responsibility. The man by the car took a careful breath, following the waiter's example. He realized that calm could be as powerful as action. He felt a small surge of courage, enough to steady him in a moment when fear could have taken over. He was not alone, and that knowledge gave him a quiet strength. The attackers glanced at each other again, sensing that the simple dynamics of fear and power had shifted. Their plan relied on intimidation, on surprise, on numbers. Now, with the waiter between them and their intended target, their strategy was in question. The hesitation was visible, even if they tried to mask it. For a brief moment, silence settled over the lot. The night felt heavier, more charged, as if the world itself paused to watch what would happen next. Every movement, every breath, every glance carried significance. The stakes were higher than any of the men could have imagined when they started this night. They had not counted on patience, skill, or quiet authority standing in their way. The waiter remained still, his eyes scanning, assessing, predicting. His presence alone had shifted the balance. He didn't make a move, but the attackers felt it anyway. They sensed competence, readiness, and discipline. They could see the subtle ways he could respond, how easily the situation could change if they miscalculated. And in that moment, the man by the car understood something important. Help sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. From ordinary faces hiding extraordinary skills. From calm hands ready to intervene without making noise. He trusted the waiter completely, letting the confidence flow into him just enough to steady his own heart. The four men paused. Their plan was faltering, their certainty dissolving. They had expected an easy encounter, an advantage, a straightforward execution. But the world they thought they controlled had changed. And in that change, the balance had shifted in favor of someone they had underestimated completely. The air grew heavier as the minutes stretched, the tension almost visible in the faint light of the parking lot. The four men stood uncertain now, shifting their weight but not making a move. The waiter remained calm, steady, alert. Every step he had taken, every movement he made had been quiet, but it had changed the dynamic entirely. The attackers no longer held the invisible power they had believed was theirs. They had assumed fear would follow their shadows, that the man by the car would be frozen with panic, that nothing could stop their plan. They had misjudged completely. The man by the car stayed close to the waiter, drawing strength from his presence. He could feel his own heartbeat slowing slightly, the rhythm of fear giving way to careful focus. He didn't understand what the waiter would do if the men made a move, but he trusted that it would be enough. He trusted the quiet confidence, the subtle readiness, the way the waiter's eyes never wavered, constantly scanning, noticing, predicting. There was a calm that felt alive and potent, a human presence that demanded attention without a word. One of the attackers, the second tallest, took a half step forward, his gaze darting between the man by the car and the waiter. He tested the silence with a short, sharp question. "Who are you?" The waiter didn't answer immediately. His eyes never left the man. The question, though simple, didn't need a spoken reply. His stance, his stillness, and the way he held himself communicated everything without a single word. He wasn't just a waiter. He was someone trained to respond. Someone prepared. Someone who could prevent harm in ways the attackers could not predict. The tallest man clenched his fists, frustration showing behind a controlled exterior. He had expected resistance, perhaps, but not this. He hadn't calculated discipline, patience, or awareness. He tried again, a little more forcefully this time. "Step aside. Now." The waiter shifted slightly, enough to position himself more directly between the attackers and the man by the car. His movements were deliberate, controlled, yet subtle. Every tiny motion carried the message. "I am aware. I am ready. I will protect." The four men hesitated. They had prepared for confrontation. Yes, but not for this level of composure and control. Even the smallest uncertainty could undo their confidence. And that's exactly what was happening. The man by the car felt his body tense, but in a different way than before. It wasn't fear this time. It was awareness, attention, a sense of readiness that came from someone you trust completely. He mirrored the waiter unconsciously, keeping his movements small, measured, deliberate. It was a quiet partnership formed without words, one person lending calm, one person absorbing it. One of the attackers reached into his pocket slowly. The waiter's eyes flicked to the movement, sharp and focused, noticing the smallest detail. The man by the car froze, realizing too late what the gesture might mean. But before any action could take place, the waiter moved again, subtly, carefully, but decisively. He shifted his stance, a small pivot of the body, a minor adjustment of weight, and in that instant, the potential danger evaporated. The attackers felt the precision, the readiness, the unspoken understanding that any reckless movement would be met with skill and discipline. The flicker of surprise passed across their faces, and hesitation grew. The tallest man, sensing that their intimidation was failing, tried a new approach. He spoke louder, more commanding, forcing a tone meant to assert authority. "We said move." The waiter didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He only held the space between them and the man by the car. The calm authority in his posture and eyes conveyed far more than words ever could. The attackers felt it, the shift in power, the invisible boundary that they could not cross without consequence. And in that moment, their confidence wavered further. The man by the car realized that action was now unnecessary. He only needed to follow, trust, and remain calm. Every instinct that had screamed fear now settled into a quiet alertness. He understood that someone else's expertise had become his shield, and that alone gave him courage. He could breathe again, even if just a little, and focus on the scene unfolding before him. The second tallest attacker shifted again, subtly, almost imperceptibly. His companions mirrored the action, small but telling signs of uncertainty. They had expected compliance or panic, but they hadn't received either. Instead, they faced a quiet human presence, a human force that did not demand violence, but that held in readiness if necessary. They began to realize that their calculated advantage was slipping through their fingers. The waiter took another careful step, keeping the man by the car between himself and the attackers. He moved slowly, measured, each motion deliberate but fluid, like water flowing around obstacles. There was a confidence in the movement, the kind that comes from experience and careful practice, not aggression or showmanship. The attacker's eyes darted, searching for a weakness, a hesitation, any sign that they could exploit, but the waiter revealed none. Every movement was precise, controlled, intentional. The tallest man muttered under his breath, frustrated. He tried a last attempt to assert dominance, stepping forward slightly, but the waiter remained a barrier. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't make sudden movements. He merely stood there, aware, prepared, and resolute. And that was enough. For a long moment, silence ruled. Only the faint hum of distant traffic and the quiet of the night broke the tension. The attackers exchanged glances, weighing options. Their plan had been disrupted, their expectation of fear unfulfilled. They sensed that one wrong move could unravel everything. They were aware now, painfully, that they faced more than a simple victim. They faced someone with skill, patience, and determination. The man by the car watched closely, learning from the waiter's example. He understood that control did not always come from force. Sometimes, control came from awareness, discipline, and timing. He mirrored the quiet alertness, small shifts in posture, subtle changes in breathing. The confidence that radiated from the waiter flowed into him, helping him regain composure he didn't realize he had lost. The attackers paused. The tallest man took a slow breath. Then another. He realized that the advantage they had counted on had vanished. Their intended target remained unharmed, protected by a presence they had neither seen nor expected. Their hesitation grew, feeding uncertainty among them. The night had turned into a test of patience and skill, one they had underestimated. The waiter's eyes scanned, assessing, predicting, anticipating. Every small detail mattered. The spacing of the men, their subtle movements, the way they shifted weight, the expression of their eyes. He didn't need to rush. He didn't need to panic. He only needed to maintain awareness and readiness, and a natural course of events would follow his lead. The man by the car stood slightly taller, shoulders squared. He had learned a small but powerful lesson in confidence and trust. He followed the waiter's lead, every subtle motion measured, every breath deliberate. Together, they created a presence that could not be ignored. The attackers felt it in the weight of silence, the tension in the air, the quiet certainty that their plan was crumbling. Time seemed to stretch. The attackers shifted again, their confidence slipping further. They had expected a quick, uncomplicated confrontation, but instead faced patient, controlled resistance. Their advantage, once numerical and calculated, now felt fragile. They realized that the human element, discipline, awareness, calm, was far more powerful than they had anticipated. The waiter's gaze did not waver. He did not speak. He did not act aggressively. Yet in every small detail, stance, posture, eye contact, he communicated readiness, skill, and the promised protection. The attackers could feel it, even if they could not name it. Their plan was unraveling, and with it, the certainty they had counted on for success. The tallest man muttered under his breath again, frustration mingling with unease. He glanced at his companions, seeing the doubt reflected in their eyes. They had not expected to meet resistance. Not this type of human presence that could shift the balance without a single aggressive act. The pause stretched, heavy with uncertainty, as the night seemed to hold its breath. The man by the car realized that the situation had shifted entirely. The danger was still present, but the dynamic had changed. He was no longer helpless, no longer just a target. Through the quiet, steady presence of the waiter, he had regained a sense of agency, even in small, subtle ways. He could move with caution, follow instructions, and maintain composure. And that small, quiet power was enough to alter the course of the night. The attackers exchanged one last uncertain glance. Their confidence faltered completely. The night that had begun with a sense of control for them now carried only doubt. The waiter stood firm, prepared, aware, patient. The man by the car followed, steady and deliberate. And for the first time, the four men truly understood that their plan could fail, that they had underestimated the human element, that one quiet, skilled individual could change everything. The night seemed to stretch as if time itself had slowed down. The four men froze, uncertain of their next move. The air felt heavier now, charged with tension that wasn't just about fear, but awareness. They had expected quick compliance or panic, but the scene before them was neither. The man by the car was no longer shaking uncontrollably. He was standing straighter, more aware, following the subtle guidance of the waiter. He felt the quiet power that came from the man's presence, and it gave him a strange strength, a sense that he could breathe again even when danger lurked close. The waiter had not moved aggressively, yet his skill was clear. Every motion, every glance, every step was controlled, precise. It wasn't bravado. It was experience, careful calculation, and discipline born from years of training long before he had ever worked a shift in a restaurant. It was something he had buried deep, something he had chosen to leave behind for a normal life. But tonight, it had resurfaced without hesitation, because he couldn't ignore what he saw. The instinct to protect, to prevent harm, had been stronger than the life he had tried to live quietly. One of the attackers, the second tallest, shifted again, hands trembling slightly now. He looked at the others, seeking guidance, trying to decide whether to push forward or retreat. Their confidence was crumbling. They had relied on numbers and fear, but both had failed. The quiet, deliberate authority of the waiter had dismantled their assumptions without a single shout or sudden move. Their plan, once so sure, now seemed fragile, almost laughable in the face of this calm presence. The tallest man tried to assert dominance again. He stepped forward, voice louder this time. "Step aside now." The waiter remained still. He didn't answer, didn't threaten, didn't raise his hands. He simply held his ground, a subtle barrier between the attackers and the man by the car. Every inch he claimed in space was intentional, measured, purposeful. His calm was almost tangible, a quiet assertion that made the men hesitate. They had no idea what he was capable of, only that he was aware and ready for anything. The man by the car felt a strange sense of gratitude. He had never spoken to this man outside the restaurant, yet here he was, a silent guardian. The presence alone offered hope. He mirrored the calm, aligning his own movements with the waiter's subtle cues. Even a small gesture, stepping slightly left, keeping his hands visible, was enough to show the men that panic would not be an option tonight. The tallest man clenched his fists, tension coiling in his shoulders. He could see that their intimidation tactics were failing. Every step they took to advance was calculated, but hesitation now shadowed their faces. The balance had shifted. Their expectation of fear and submission had been replaced by a disciplined calm they had not considered. It was disarming, unsettling, and utterly unexpected. The waiter's eyes never left the attackers. They flicked from face to face, noticing the smallest changes in expression, every shift in stance, every subtle movement of hands or feet. He processed each detail instantly, predicting potential actions, calculating outcomes, anticipating their reactions. The years of training long hidden under the guise of a normal life had prepared him for this. He wasn't acting recklessly or violently. He was ready, aware, and in control. The man by the car realized how important patience could be. The night had not forced him to act heroically. It forced him to trust, to follow, to stay calm. Every breath, every step was deliberate, carefully measured. He drew on the waiter's quiet authority, feeling a sense of agency he had thought lost. He was not just a target anymore. He was part of the human barrier that had begun to dismantle the attacker's confidence. The second tallest attacker tried another approach. He whispered something to the others, a plan, perhaps a signal. They glanced at each other, uneasy, unsure of how to proceed. They had trained for confrontation, yes, but never for a situation where patience and awareness could be more powerful than aggression. Each second they hesitated. The balance tipped further in favor of the man and the waiter. The tallest man made a final attempt at intimidation. He stepped closer, leaning slightly forward, trying to convey dominance. The waiter didn't flinch. He adjusted his stance slightly, a subtle movement, just enough to maintain control, without drawing attention to strength. The calm precision in his body language communicated one undeniable message. Any rash action could lead to failure. The attackers felt it instinctively. Their confidence faltered. The night had begun to work against them. The man by the car noticed small details he had missed before. The way the waiter's shoulders never tensed, the relaxed but alert position of his hands, the way his eyes scanned, predicting movements. This wasn't arrogance or threat. This was skill, honed and buried deep, now resurfaced to protect life in a single, quiet moment. It was extraordinary, yet entirely human. It was discipline and instinct combined, the kind of preparation born from experience rather than chance. The attackers shifted uneasily. The tallest man muttered under his breath, frustrated and anxious. They had relied on fear, on numbers, on surprise. Now all three had faltered under the simple, quiet presence of one man who refused to panic. Every inch of space, every step, every glance from him was a challenge they hadn't anticipated. The night had changed. Their plan was unraveling, and they knew it. The man by the car realized how rare this moment was. He had never faced real danger before, and now he saw firsthand how awareness and skill could prevent harm without unnecessary aggression. He stayed aligned with the waiter, subtle in every move, following cues he barely understood but trusted completely. It was a quiet partnership, unspoken, built on instinct and trust. Time seemed to stretch. The attackers exchanged uncertain glances, trying to reassess the situation. They had come prepared, yes, but they had not prepared for the presence of someone who could control the moment without a word, without a display of violence. The balance had shifted entirely. Every second they hesitated. Every pause weakened their resolve. The night was no longer theirs. The waiter's gaze never wavered. Every detail mattered. The slight tilt of the head, the shift of weight, the tension in their fingers. He calculated each movement, anticipating every possible outcome, prepared to act if necessary. But action was secondary to presence. He held the space, offered a barrier, and exuded confidence that required no words. The attackers sensed it, and it unsettled them. The man by the car felt a small spark of courage. He realized that he was not powerless, not entirely. Through trust and awareness, he had regained a sense of control, even in a situation where his life was at risk. Every breath, every step, every subtle movement contributed to a balance that favored protection over aggression. The attackers looked at each other one final time. Doubt shadowed their eyes. Hesitation slowed their movements, and fear crept in where arrogance had once been. They realized that the night, their carefully planned encounter, was slipping through their fingers. They had underestimated patience, awareness, and quiet strength. They had underestimated the human element, the combination of skill, discipline, and care that could shift everything without unnecessary force. The waiter stood firm, alert but calm, ready but unassuming. The man by the car mirrored him subtly, aware that even small motions mattered. The attacker sensed a change, the balance that had shifted, the human presence that was more powerful than numbers or intimidation. They had miscalculated, and the consequences were now clear. The night seemed to pause. The air was heavy, charged with the weight of understanding that one quiet, skilled, and disciplined individual could protect life without creating chaos. The attackers hesitated, uncertain, unsure how to proceed. The man by the car, emboldened by trust and awareness, remained calm, following the subtle guidance of the waiter. And the waiter, patient, ready, and quietly authoritative, held the line, allowing the night to tip in favor of protection and life over aggression and fear. The tension in the parking lot had reached a quiet peak. The four men had stopped moving entirely, their confidence eroded by the subtle yet firm presence of the waiter. Every step they had planned seemed now like a mistake. Every calculated threat now overshadowed by uncertainty. The waiter remained calm, a barrier that needed no force to convey authority. He didn't shout, didn't rush, didn't provoke. His posture, his gaze, and his unwavering attention were enough to control the situation. The man by the car breathed more steadily, feeling a strange relief in the waiter's presence. He had never met someone like this, someone whose skill and awareness radiated quietly but unmistakably. There was a human warmth and restraint, a careful respect for life that went beyond instinct or training. It was clear that the waiter wasn't seeking recognition or praise. He was simply there to prevent harm, and that quiet determination was more powerful than any weapon. One of the attackers, the shortest of four, glanced nervously at his companions. Their hesitation was growing. They had expected a fight, a quick and easy act of intimidation. Instead, they faced patience, precision, and awareness. Each second of hesitation widened the gap between them and the outcome they had anticipated. Their plan, once so carefully constructed, now seemed fragile, even absurd. The tallest man exhaled sharply through his nose, frustration and fear mingling in the tense muscles of his face. He stepped back slightly, as if reconsidering everything. Every instinct he had trained on had been rendered uncertain by one simple, human presence that refused to yield to panic or aggression. He looked at his companions, who mirrored his uncertainty. The night had turned against them without a single move by the man they had targeted, without a shout, without a strike. The power they thought they held had vanished. The waiter remained calm, watching, alert. He knew they were calculating, reassessing, unsure what to do next. He didn't need to act immediately. He only needed to maintain control through awareness and patience, allowing the attackers to see that any action would be met with preparedness and discipline. Every subtle shift, every small adjustment in stance communicated readiness, and that communication was more effective than confrontation. The man by the car began to understand something vital. Control did not always come from strength or force. Sometimes it came from focus, awareness, and trust. He mirrored the waiter subtly, standing with quiet steadiness, making himself appear less vulnerable without drawing attention. He felt a sense of partnership forming, a silent acknowledgement of reliance and mutual awareness. The human connection, though unspoken, was powerful. Outside, the four men exchanged uncertain glances again. They had underestimated what they were dealing with. Numbers and aggression no longer mattered. They had misjudged patience, calm, and skill. The night had shifted in ways they could not control. They had expected easy compliance, but instead faced quiet discipline, an unwavering commitment to prevent harm. Every second of hesitation made retreat seem more reasonable, but pride and fear tangled with caution, holding them in place. The waiter made a subtle movement, adjusting his stance to slightly cover more space between the attackers and the man by the car. It was a gesture almost too small to notice, but it communicated something significant. Protection, control, awareness. The attackers noticed. The smallest shift revealed the potential for an outcome they hadn't planned for. The fear of uncertainty outweighed the desire for confrontation. The man by the car felt his heart rate slow. He realized that he was no longer merely a potential victim. Through the waiter's calm and controlled presence, he had regained a measure of agency. He could act carefully, stay alert, and participate in the balance of the moment. The quiet human force beside him had restored something important. The sense that even ordinary people could influence extraordinary situations. The tallest man muttered under his breath, frustration clear. His companions watched, equally tense. They had underestimated the human element, the skill that came from experience, discipline, and awareness. The plan they had thought was foolproof now seemed like a fragile illusion, easily broken by patience and presence. They began to step back, small movements of retreat, hesitant and unsure. The waiter didn't press forward. He didn't need to. His awareness alone guided the men to reconsider. He maintained space, calmness, and readiness, giving the attackers no reason to advance, but allowing them to leave without escalating the situation. It was a delicate balance, controlled entirely by subtle gestures and human discipline. The man by the car took another careful breath. He realized that life sometimes provided help from the most unexpected sources. The waiter, an ordinary-seeming man doing an ordinary job, had revealed extraordinary capability when it mattered most. He had stepped in, not for recognition or reward, but out of human responsibility and awareness. It was a lesson in trust, patience, and the quiet power of skill without aggression. The attackers, sensing the futility of their intended actions, began to back away more decisively. Their steps were slow, careful, and cautious, but moving nonetheless. They understood that the night had not unfolded according to their plan. The advantage they believed they held had dissolved. Pride and caution fought for dominance in their minds, but retreat was inevitable. The waiter watched their movements closely. He was alert, ready for any sudden turn, but he didn't need to act. The subtle shifts in body language, the hesitant steps, and the lack of commitment to advance were enough to guide the situation toward resolution. His skill was not in confrontation, but in maintaining control through presence, awareness, and discipline. The man by the car followed the waiter's lead, keeping calm, moving carefully. He no longer felt panic. He felt guided, protected, and aware. The partnership, though unspoken, was clear. One human's experience and calm could stabilize another's fear. The situation was no longer chaotic. It was controlled, deliberate, and human-centered. The four men retreated completely, their faces a mixture of frustration, uncertainty, and realization. They understood that numbers and aggression were not always enough. Sometimes, the balance of situation could be shifted entirely by discipline, awareness, and quiet skill. They left the parking lot without further incident, their plan broken, their confidence shaken. The waiter watched them go, eyes scanning until the threat had completely vanished. Only then did he allow himself a small exhale, releasing the tension that had remained coiled throughout the encounter. He adjusted his jacket slightly, returning to his normal, polite demeanor. The extraordinary moment had passed, leaving ordinary appearances intact, but the impact on the man by the car was profound. The man turned toward the waiter, gratitude shining in his eyes. Words failed him for a moment. The realization of what had just occurred settled over him. A simple human presence, skilled, disciplined, and aware, had prevented potential disaster. It wasn't violence or showmanship that had saved him. It was calm, patience, and human skill applied at the right moment. Later, the man would offer money, recognition, and opportunities to the waiter, but the waiter declined most of it, accepting only help that would secure his daughter's future. He had acted out of instinct and human responsibility, not reward. The life of the single father remained grounded in simple priorities, the well-being of his child and the quiet dignity of work done well. The man by the car realized that the night had changed him too. He had witnessed courage, patience, and skill in a way he had never known. He had learned that true strength was not always loud or visible, but often quiet, precise, and human. He left the parking lot with renewed respect for ordinary people capable of extraordinary acts when it truly mattered. The night settled once more, calm now in a way it hadn't been since the encounter began. The waiter returned to the restaurant, collecting his apron, returning to his normal tasks as if nothing had happened. Yet for the man by the car, the memory of the night, of the quiet heroism, and the subtle power of human presence would stay with him forever. Lives have been changed without a single headline, without recognition, and in the ordinary act of responsibility. The extraordinary had occurred. The lesson was simple, but profound. Awareness, patience, and discipline could protect life more than aggression, and human skill applied with care was the most powerful force of all.